I sold the company for $36 million and decided to celebrate with my son and his wife. I booked a table at the most elegant restaurant in the city. When they went out on the floor for a slow song, a security guard approached me and spoke. "I saw her put something in your glass of juice." 15 minutes later, I got up and left. I'm glad you're here. If you are watching this video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are listening to my story of vengeance from. I want to know how far it has traveled. The restaurant's band began to play a slow ballad. The soft melody took me back to the old days, when my husband was still alive. Isabella, my daughter-in-law, gently pulled on the hand of Daniel, my son, leading him to the dance floor, her gaze bright and full of life. Daniel looked at me, a little uncomfortably, as if asking for permission. I waved my hand and smiled. "Go on, sweetheart. I'm happy just watching you two dance." I followed their silhouettes with my eyes, Daniel tall and sturdy, petite Isabella resting on his shoulder, gliding across the floor. I tried a piece of a bread roll, attempting to enjoy that moment of peace, but inside me there was a feeling that was hard to explain, as if something wasn't right. Amidst that elegant atmosphere, a figure silently approached my table. It was the restaurant's security guard, with a nameplate that read Marcus. He was short and stocky, with a hard face but a piercing gaze. He leaned in, pretending to adjust the vase of flowers on the table, and then suddenly brought his mouth to my ear, his voice low and urgent, as if he feared someone might overhear. "Ma'am, I just saw your daughter-in-law put something in your orange juice." That sentence was like a dagger straight to the heart. I felt my chest stop for a moment, my throat as dry as if someone were squeezing it. I tried to keep my face serene, barely nodding, as if I were used to these things. But the truth was, I wasn't. Marcus understood. He took a few steps back and returned to his post in the corner of the room. His eyes remained fixed on our table, grave and attentive, like a soldier on guard. I lowered my gaze to the glass of juice in front of me. Under the warm light, I could distinguish tiny bubbles rising to the surface, so small they were almost unnoticeable. That wasn't normal for freshly squeezed juice. My heart was pounding hard, as if it wanted to break out of my chest. I took a deep breath, trying to contain the tremor that ran from my fingers through my entire body. A few hours earlier, I had arrived at the most luxurious restaurant in the city. The clock read 10 minutes to 7. I arrived a little early, as I usually do, always paying attention to every detail. That day, I wore a dark blue dress that I had kept for years in the closet, reserved for special occasions, for when I needed to remind myself that I was still worthy, that I still deserved to be loved. Today was such a day, or so I thought. The place looked like a warm painting filled with golden lights. The piano played softly, mingling with the clinking of glasses, composing an elegant melody I had always dreamed of enjoying with my family. A young waiter, in a flawless black suit, smiled at me and led me to the table by the window that I had reserved. The white tablecloth was without a single wrinkle, and in the center, a small vase with red roses whose faint aroma calmed me. I sat down, unthinkingly stroking the edge of the tablecloth, trying to savor that moment. At 7 o'clock sharp, Daniel and Isabella entered. My son looked handsome in his gray suit, his hair neatly combed, his smile as radiant as when he was a boy and would run into my arms after school. Isabella, my daughter-in-law, looked like a brilliant flower in a tight red dress that captured all the attention in the room. They approached. They gave me firm hugs and affectionate kisses. Isabella, with great charm, praised my dress in a sweet voice. "Eleanor, that blue looks gorgeous on you. It makes you look 10 years younger." I smiled, and a warmth spread through my soul, as if everything was in its right place, as if my family was still united. We sat at the table. Daniel ordered a bottle of red wine, the kind he knew I liked, the same one my husband and I used to savor on those few nights when we had time for ourselves. Isabella, elegant as always, ordered a special house juice, and I just wanted a glass of orange juice, simple like my own life. I don't like complicated things, only the familiar, what makes me feel safe. The dinner began in an atmosphere I thought was cozy. Daniel spoke enthusiastically about a new project at the company, his voice full of energy, his eyes shining as he described ambitious plans. I listened to him, proud that my son was now a grown man, building his own future. Isabella kept praising the restaurant, from the decor to the aroma of the dishes. Every now and then, she would turn to me and propose, "Eleanor, let's all go to the beach this summer, okay? It will be so much fun." I nodded, smiled, and thought that maybe I had been too hard on Isabella before. Maybe she really did want to be a part of this family. At least that's what I thought, until I heard Marcus's warning. The slow ballad ended, and scattered applause sounded from the tables around us. Daniel and Isabella returned. Isabella's cheeks flushed, her eyes shining as if she had just lived a perfect moment. Daniel was smiling. He sat down next to me and joked, "Why didn't you dance with us, Mom? With such a great song, if you had danced, I'm sure the whole restaurant would have turned to look at you." I forced a smile, but inside, I only felt cold. Marcus's warning kept echoing in my head, like a death knell that wouldn't stop ringing. I looked at Isabella. She was still radiant, still charming, as if nothing had happened. But in her gaze, though fleeting, there was something icy, as if she were trying to read my reaction. "I'm getting too old for that, sweetheart," I replied, trying to sound natural. "Just seeing you two happy is enough to make me feel fulfilled." Daniel let out a laugh and gave my hand a gentle pat, but I felt in that gesture a complete innocence, as if he had no idea of the storm raging in his mother's heart. Suddenly, Isabella pushed the glass of orange juice toward me, with a voice so sweet it made my skin crawl. "Eleanor, have some juice. You haven't had a thing to drink all night. I think you look a little tired." The glass shimmered under the yellow light, but the tiny bubbles on the surface seemed to whisper something terrible. I looked at her, searching her eyes for a trace of regret, of doubt, but there was nothing. Only a perfect smile, the same one I had previously mistaken for genuine concern. I brought my hand to my temple, feigning fatigue. "Oh, I don't know why. I feel a little dizzy," I said, my voice weak, drawing out the words so they both could hear. Daniel was immediately alarmed, leaning toward me. "Mom, are you okay? Do you want me to call a doctor?" I shook my head. I smiled to reassure him, but inside I just wanted to scream, to grab him by the shoulders and tell him that his wife, the woman he loved, was plotting to harm me. But I couldn't. It wasn't out of fear, but because I knew that without proof, Daniel would never believe me. He would think his mother was crazy, that I was jealous of his happiness. I reached out to take the glass of orange juice, letting my hand tremble on purpose. I wanted them to see me as weak, to think I suspected nothing. But then, as if by accident, I tipped the glass. The orange liquid spilled onto the tablecloth, forming a large puddle that soaked the corner of the white linen napkin. "Oh my God," Isabella exclaimed, her voice a little sharp, mixed with a hint of annoyance she was trying to hide. A waiter immediately rushed over with a cloth and hurried apologies, as if he himself had spilled the glass. In the midst of that chaos, I quickly grabbed the juice-soaked napkin. I folded it carefully and tucked it into the deep pocket of the coat hanging next to my chair. My movement was quick and discreet, but my heart was pounding so hard it felt like the whole world could hear it. That napkin, soaked and heavy, was the only proof I had. It was what would prove that I wasn't crazy, that what Marcus had said was true. Daniel put his hand on my shoulder, his voice full of worry. "Mom, are you okay? You look very pale." I looked into his eyes, the same eyes I had looked into since he was a child, eyes that had always trusted his mother. But now I didn't know if he still trusted me, when his wife, sitting right next to him, was playing the part of the perfect daughter-in-law. "It must be that I'm not used to the noise," I replied in a weak voice. "I feel a little suffocated, honey. I'll be fine in a little while." Isabella chimed in immediately, her voice sweet, but I could tell it was forced. "Would you like me to get you a glass of water? You'll feel better." I shook my head and smiled faintly. "There's no need, dear. I'm fine." I saw her gaze pass over the puddle of juice on the table with a flash of tension, but she soon regained her composure and continued talking to Daniel as if nothing had happened. I signaled the waiter to pay. Daniel wanted to take out his wallet, but I had already put down my credit card. "It's my treat tonight," I said firmly. "Don't argue with me." I didn't want to prolong that moment. I didn't want to stay another second in a place where I felt like the falsehood was suffocating me. Daniel smiled and shook his head. "Mom, you're always the same. You never let me pay." As I stood up, I leaned on the chair as if I were about to fall. Daniel immediately took my hand, his voice filled with concern. "Mom, let me take you home. You're not well, and I won't be at ease." I shook my head, forcing a smile. "There's no need, son. You two stay and enjoy the night. I'll take a taxi, and I'll be better in a little while." Isabella also spoke, her voice concerned, but I knew it was fake. "Take care of yourself. Let me call a cab for you." I waved my hand, immediately refusing. "I can manage on my own." I walked out the door. Each step felt heavy, as if I were carrying 1,000 pounds. Marcus was still there, in the corner of the lobby, standing tall like a guard. Our eyes met for just an instant, but it was enough to feel his empathy and his warning. I nodded slightly, a discreet gesture, in place of the gratitude I couldn't speak aloud. He responded with another slight nod, his gaze still sharp, as if telling me he would keep watching. The taxi was already waiting at the door. I got in, clutching my coat pocket tightly. Inside, the damp and cold napkin was the only thing keeping me grounded. It was the proof of a cruel plan, a plan I never thought I'd have to face, especially not from someone in my own family. The neon lights of the streets passed by the taxi window, bright like a painting full of life, but they couldn't dispel the cold that wrapped around me from within. I remained silent, holding the coat pocket, feeling the damp napkin like heavy evidence, reminding me of the brutal truth that had just unfolded. When the taxi stopped in front of the house, I got out with heavy steps, as if I were carrying a mountain on my shoulders. The house was dark, terrifyingly silent, as if it too were trembling at what I had just experienced. I hung my coat on the rack, but my hands were shaking so much I almost dropped it. I carefully took out the napkin, each movement slow, fearing it might disappear. It was soaked with a strong orange scent, and it was no longer an inanimate object, but a silent accusation. I opened the refrigerator. I took out a clean plastic bag. I put the napkin inside. I sealed the Ziploc tightly and put it in the cold compartment. I closed the door. I stood there for a moment, still holding onto the handle as if I needed it to keep from falling apart. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of the private lab I had trusted for years. My voice still trembled, though I tried to speak clearly. "Hello, this is Eleanor Miller. I'll be bringing a sample in tomorrow. It's very important. Could you give it priority and check it immediately?" On the other end, the familiar voice of an old friend answered sincerely. "Mrs. Miller, don't you worry. I'll take care of it. Bring it in early tomorrow and I'll get you the results as fast as possible." I thanked him and hung up, but the feeling of relief didn't come. Instead, a diffuse fear appeared, as if I had entered a dead-end road. I let myself fall into the old armchair in the living room, where Arthur and I used to sit for hours talking about the future. I turned on the table lamp, the yellowish light illuminating our wedding portrait on the wall. In the photo, Arthur and I were together, smiling as if the whole world belonged to us. Arthur, with his black hair and warm eyes, always made me feel safe. Looking at him, the memories returned so vividly, I could almost hear his laughter, almost smell the flour from those days we shared. I remembered the early mornings when it was still foggy, and Arthur and I would get up at 3 to knead dough in the small kitchen of the Miller's Hearth Bakery. Back then, the shop was just an old corner store, with a worn-out oven and a few wobbly wooden tables. But we had each other, and the certainty that, with hard work, everything would turn out all right. I remember the sweat running down Arthur's forehead as he carried the sacks of flour. I remember his smile when the first batch of bread sold out in a few hours. "Eleanor, did you see that? They love our bread," he exclaimed, lifting me up in a spin in the middle of the shop, both of us covered in flour. Those years, though hard, were the happiest of my life. The bakery grew from a small shop to become the Miller's Hearth chain, famous throughout the region. We opened more branches, hired employees, and every night, as we counted the money in the back room, Arthur and I dreamed of a better future for Daniel, our little boy. But, like in a nightmare, Arthur was suddenly gone. A swift illness took him from me, leaving me with an impossible pain to heal and a baking empire that I had to sustain alone. I did everything for Daniel. I stayed up late, got up early, ran from one shop to another, being both mother and father, as well as a businesswoman. I wanted him to have a better life than ours, so he wouldn't have to worry like his mother did. When Daniel grew up, smart and hardworking, I thought I had fulfilled my duty, and when he married Isabella, I breathed a sigh of relief, believing I could finally rest. Isabella, with her radiant smile and her sweet way of speaking, made me believe my family was complete. On weekends, they would come to the house, take me to church, to the market, or just sit with me to share a family meal. I used to think, Eleanor, you did it. You gave Daniel a home. Because of that trust, I decided to sell the bakery chain. $36 million, a huge sum, was the fruit of my entire life and Arthur's. I dreamed of the day I would see Daniel and Isabella happy upon receiving that money. I dreamed they would use it to build a solid future, maybe a new house, their own business, or even that trip Isabella talked about so much. I imagined their grateful looks, their tight hugs, their sincere words of thanks. But now, sitting in the cold living room, I realize I was wrong. That money, which I thought would bring happiness, had become the reason Isabella wanted me to disappear. I reach out my hand to the frame of the wedding photo, my fingers brushing against Arthur's smile. My love, I whisper. What should I do? Hot tears run down my cheeks, burning my skin. I remember the words Arthur used to say, that family was the most important thing, that as long as we had each other, nothing would be impossible to overcome. But now, the family I tried to keep together is falling apart, not because of a loss, but because of a betrayal. Isabella, whom I considered a daughter, to whom I opened my heart, could be so cruel. And Daniel, the son I love more than my own life, will he believe me when the truth comes to light? The pendulum of the clock strikes 11 at night, each tick like a hammer blow to my chest. I turn off the light, but the darkness doesn't help me escape the thoughts tearing me apart. I sit in the freezing living room, feeling more alone than ever. I lost Arthur. I lost those happy days. And now I'm losing faith in my own family. The next morning I woke up when it was still dark, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't sleep. All night, the image of the orange juice with those tiny bubbles tormented me, like a reminder that I almost lost my life. I put on an old sweater, covered my head with a cap to hide my dark circles, and grabbed the plastic bag with the napkin before leaving the house. The street was deserted. Only the isolated song of birds could be heard, and, in the distance, the rumbling of the garbage truck. I walked quickly, as if moving slower would rob me of the courage to face what was to come. The lab was on a quiet corner, with a sign so small it seemed to want to go unnoticed. When I arrived, Charles, the administrator and an old family friend, was already waiting for me at the door. He wore a white lab coat, his face kind but full of concern upon seeing me. "Eleanor, you're early," he said in a grave voice. "Come in, I've prepared everything." I nodded without saying a word and silently handed him the plastic bag. "Charles, I need to know exactly what's in here," I insisted, my voice trembling though I tried to remain calm. "This is a matter of life and death, do you understand?" He looked at me seriously and then nodded. "I understand, Eleanor. I'll get you the result as quickly as possible. Don't worry." I didn't want to go back home. I didn't want to sit in the cold living room where every corner reminded me of the days I had lost. Instead, I went to a small diner nearby where I used to sit with Arthur on weekend mornings, when we were young and life was full of hope. I ordered a cup of chamomile tea, the only thing I thought could calm the storm inside me. The waitress, a young girl, smiled and asked if I wanted a pastry, but I shook my head. I couldn't eat, couldn't think of anything but the napkin being analyzed. I sat by the window, watching people pass by. Mothers pushing strollers, men rushing to work, couples holding hands, laughing and talking. They looked happy, carefree. I, on the other hand, felt trapped in a nightmare with no way out. I forced myself to continue with my routine, as if nothing were wrong. At noon, I stopped by the grocery store, bought some vegetables, a little milk, and a few things I didn't really need. I pushed the cart between the aisles, my hands on the carrots, but my eyes fixed on the phone, waiting for a call. The cashier, a young girl, looked at me and smiled. "Are you all right, ma'am? You look a little tired today." I forced a smile and replied, "Yes. It must be from not sleeping well." "Thank you." But inside, I just wanted to scream that I wasn't okay, that I was scared, that I had just discovered that someone I considered a child could be trying to harm me. In the early afternoon, the phone vibrated. It was Charles. "Eleanor, can you come back? I have the result." His voice was low, emotionless, but I noted its seriousness. I rushed back to the lab. My heart was pounding hard, as if each beat were a warning. Charles met me at the door and led me to a small office with just an old wooden desk and a few chairs. He closed the door. He placed a paper on the desk. His face hardened like I had never seen it before. "Sit down, Eleanor," he said in a grave voice. I sat, gripping the edge of the chair to keep from trembling. "Mrs. Miller," Charles began, not taking his eyes off me. "The sample from the napkin contains digitalis, a poison extracted from the foxglove plant. It's often used in heart medication, but at this dose—" He paused. He took a deep breath, as if even he didn't want to continue. "If you had drunk that entire glass, it would have caused death within a few hours. The symptoms would have looked like a natural heart attack. No one would have suspected a thing." My ears were ringing, as if the entire world had suddenly gone silent. My hands trembled as I took the report. The letters blurred before my eyes. Digitalis. Death. Heart attack. Those words were like knives straight to my heart. Charles continued, his voice low but clear. "This drug isn't sold over the counter, Eleanor. To get it, you need special contacts, usually on the black market. Someone did this on purpose." I looked at him. I wanted to ask something, but my throat went dry and I couldn't utter a word. I just nodded. I said thank you and carefully folded the report before putting it in my purse. As I left the lab, the afternoon sun made me squint, but that sun couldn't warm me. Inside, I only felt an icy cold, as if my whole body were freezing. My suspicions had been confirmed. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't my paranoia. It was a premeditated plan to kill me. And the person behind it all was Isabella, my daughter-in-law, whom I had loved like a daughter. That night I sat alone in the living room. The dim light from the lamp illuminated the lab report on the table. The cold letters, digitalis, lethal dose. They seemed to stare at me, forcing me to face the cruel truth. I clenched my fist, my nails digging into my palm, trying to stop the whirlwind of thoughts. I knew I couldn't go on like this, just sitting here, letting fear consume me. I needed to act. I needed someone to help me bring the truth to light. I wouldn't have enough strength on my own. Then I remembered Veronica Stone. She had been a friend of Arthur's, a sharp police detective my husband always spoke of with respect. "If anything serious happens, find Veronica," he used to say. "She never gives up." After retiring, Veronica opened a private detective agency, and although I hadn't seen her in years, I knew she was the only one I could trust now. I picked up the phone. My hand was shaking so much I almost dropped it. When I heard her voice on the other end of the line, low and self-assured, I realized just how much I was trembling. "Veronica," I said with a broken voice, "I need your help. It's a matter of life and death." She didn't ask many questions. She just replied, "Eleanor, come to my office tomorrow morning. Bring everything you have." I nodded, even though I knew she couldn't see me, and hung up. I sat there, in the dark room, feeling like the whole world was against me. But Veronica's voice, though brief, gave me a small spark of hope, like a faint flame in the middle of a storm. The next morning, I arrived at Veronica's office, on the second floor of an old building downtown. The building looked worn, with peeling paint, but the large windows overlooking the main street gave me a sense of security, as if nothing could escape Veronica's eye. She met me at the door, her hair short and gray, her sharp eyes missing no detail. "Come in, Eleanor," she said in a soft but authoritative voice. I entered, clutching my purse tightly where the lab report was, that small piece of paper as heavy as an entire courthouse. I sat in the wooden chair across from Veronica's desk and told her everything from the beginning. Marcus's warning, the orange juice with strange bubbles, the napkin I secretly saved, and the cold lab result. I told it slowly, trying not to let my emotions overwhelm me, but my voice still trembled, especially when I mentioned Isabella. "I don't want to believe it," I said, my eyes burning, "but everything points to my daughter-in-law doing this." Veronica listened, taking notes quickly, without interrupting me once. When I mentioned digitalis, Her eyes narrowed, as if she had caught an important clue. "This isn't easy to get, Eleanor," she said in a grave voice. "Digitalis isn't something you can buy at the corner pharmacy. I'm going to trace its supply." Veronica didn't hesitate. She picked up the phone and called an old contact, an ex-cop who had worked with her for many years. I could overhear part of the conversation. Her voice was firm, leaving no room for the other person to refuse. A few minutes later, she hung up and turned to me. "We have a meeting. Tonight, at a small bar on the outskirts of town. This person might know who sold the Digitalis. Do you want to come with me?" I nodded immediately, without thinking. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to know the truth, even if it hurt. That night, we arrived at a hidden bar where the light was dim and the smell of stale beer permeated every corner. Veronica guided me to a secluded spot, from where I could observe without drawing attention. She sat across from a middle-aged man, nervous, his eyes darting from side to side, as if fearing discovery. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw Veronica was calm, her tone serene, sometimes nodding or asking short questions. The man was evasive at first, but under Veronica's penetrating gaze, he slowly began to talk. After a few minutes, Veronica returned to my table, her expression serious. "He admitted to selling a dose of Digitalis," she murmured, "to an elegant man in a luxury car. He says the man didn't buy it for himself, but said it was to help a young woman, to resolve some personal matters." I felt my heart lurch. "A young woman?" I repeated, my voice trembling. Veronica nodded and continued. I asked for more details. He described him as a man with salt and pepper hair, an authoritative voice, and mentioned that he had taught business classes at the university. Hearing business classes, a man's name crossed my mind. Vague but terrifying. Adrian Vance. I remembered Isabella had mentioned him at a dinner months ago. She described him with admiration, as a former professor, someone with great influence in the business world. At the time, I thought it was an insignificant comment, but now that name pierced me like a dagger. "Adrian Vance," I whispered, barely able to control myself. Veronica looked at me intently. "Do you know him?" I shook my head, though inside I knew I couldn't deny the obvious. I heard Isabella talk about him once, that's all, but I remember it. When we left the bar, the night was freezing, but my body felt like it was on fire. Veronica put her hand on my shoulder and said firmly, "I'm going to find him, Eleanor, but you need to be prepared. It's very likely this man has a direct link to your daughter-in-law." I nodded, though inside everything was a whirlwind. Adrian Vance. That name was now like a ghost, hidden in the shadows, dragging me into a labyrinth of doubt and fear. The same man Isabella had once named. A few days passed since the meeting at the bar, and I lived like a shadow, dragging my hours with a heavy heart. Every doorbell ring, every phone notification made me jump, as if Isabella were lurking, waiting for the moment to finish what she had started. I tried to keep busy by cleaning the house, cooking dishes that no one tasted, but my mind kept returning to the glass of orange juice, to Marcus's warning, and to the name Adrian Vance, a ghost that was slowly becoming clearer. Then Veronica called. Her voice on the phone was still low and firm, but there was something more urgent than usual. "Eleanor, can you come to my office right now? I have something you need to see." I didn't ask anything else. I just threw on my coat in a hurry, grabbed my purse, and ran out. On the way, I kept wondering, what else is there? What crueler secret could possibly pierce my heart again? Veronica's office was the same, with its old walls and large windows overlooking the street. She was sitting behind her desk, with a thick file folder with gray covers and worn corners in front of her. When I entered, she pushed the file toward me, her gaze serious. "Sit down, Eleanor. What's in here is not pleasant." I sat, my hands trembling as I opened the first page. It was a series of debt documents, thick black numbers on white paper, like slashes across my eyes. Isabella owed the bank, clandestine credit funds, even illegal casinos. Over $4 million in total, a huge sum, so large I couldn't imagine how she had managed to hide it from Daniel. "It seems Daniel knows nothing about this," Veronica said in a firm voice. "All the debts are in Isabella's name. There's no trace of your son." I was stunned, feeling the floor crumble beneath my feet. I remembered the times Daniel complained, his voice worried but still affectionate. "Isabella is going out with her friends late again, Mom. She likes to buy things, you know. But I'm a little worried." I had smiled, reassured him, telling him that young couples sometimes need their space. Now I realized it was all a lie. Those outings with friends, those shopping sprees, were actually nights when Isabella was sinking into casinos, gambling away our family's future. I turned the page of the file, my heart pounding hard, and then I stopped at some screenshots of messages, clearly printed on paper. The recipient was listed as AV. I knew immediately it was Adrian Vance. One message left me frozen. "She's already sold the chain of stores. $36 million are in the account. Now she just needs to disappear. Daniel will inherit everything, and of course, that money will be mine too." Those cold, venomous words were like a knife directly to my chest. I felt short of breath, as if someone were squeezing my throat. Isabella, the daughter-in-law who always called me Mom with a sweet smile, for whom I had cooked weekend meals, for whom I had sewn a wedding dress, was capable of writing such cruel words. I closed the file, my hands shaking so much I almost dropped it. Veronica put her hand on my shoulder. Her voice softened, as if to comfort me. "You see, Eleanor? The motive is crystal clear. Enormous debts, bottomless ambition, and someone behind the scenes pulling the strings. But this isn't everything. I'm still investigating more." I looked at her, searching for an answer, but my throat was dry. In the end, I could only say one sentence in a broken voice. "Daniel, the boy will never believe this." Veronica nodded, her expression full of empathy but firm. "Love has blinded him, Eleanor, but the truth, when shown with proof, cannot be denied." I remained silent, hugging the file tightly as if it were the only thing keeping me whole, and finally, I stood up to thank Veronica. When I left the office, evening was falling. The golden and orange light covered the street, but I only felt cold. I walked back home, not wanting to take a taxi, as if walking would help me sort out the pieces inside me. But the more I walked, the more it hurt. Pain for Isabella's betrayal, pain for Daniel, my son whom I had dedicated my life to protecting, living inside a lie he couldn't even imagine. I thought of Arthur, of those nights when we talked about Daniel's future. If he were alive, what would he do? He would hug me, tell me everything would be okay. But he's gone, and I'm alone, facing a truth crueler than any nightmare. The days after reading Isabella's poisonous messages, I lived like a ghost. Every morning when I woke up, I would look in the mirror and see an aged woman with deep dark circles and not an ounce of life. Veronica called me one morning, just as a ray of sun filtered through the branches outside my window. "Eleanor, you need to come in immediately." Her voice on the phone was urgent, though she maintained her characteristic calm. "I have more information, and this time it will clarify everything." I didn't ask anything else, just put on an old shirt, grabbed my purse, and ran out. On the way, I tried to prepare myself, but my heart was in chaos. I feared what I was about to hear, feared that the truth would be another stab, deeper, more painful. Upon entering Veronica's office, I saw her sitting behind her desk, with an even thicker file than the last one in front of her. She pushed it toward me, her gaze severe but filled with compassion. "Eleanor, sit down. What's in here won't be easy for you." I sat, my hands trembling as I opened the first page. An old, slightly yellowed photo struck my eye. It was a classroom, with young students sitting at their desks. In the front row, I immediately recognized Isabella, younger, her hair pulled back in a high ponytail, her eyes bright but already with a hint of ambition. And at the front, with an air of authority, was Adrian Vance, dressed in an elegant suit, holding a pointer toward the blackboard. "He wasn't just the man who sold her the drug," Veronica said in a grave voice. "He was Isabella's professor over 10 years ago, when she was studying business administration." I looked at the photo, my heart sinking. I remembered the times Isabella spoke of her university days, with pride in her voice as she recounted the inspiring professors who had influenced her. I thought they were unimportant anecdotes, but now I understood she had deliberately hidden a part of her past. Veronica turned the pages, pointing to other documents. Adrian gave Isabella a large sum of money over 10 years ago, supposedly to start a business. But it wasn't a gesture of kindness. It was a trap. She pointed to the figures, the debt contracts with usurious interest rates. Every time Isabella had difficulties, Adrian would appear, lending her more, but with increasingly harsh conditions. She was trapped, Eleanor. These debts weren't just about money. They were a chain that tied her to him. I remained silent, trying to digest every word from Veronica. I imagined Isabella, an ambitious young woman, entering Adrian's world with huge dreams, only to be manipulated and turned into a piece in his game. But that didn't lessen my pain. Even if Isabella had been manipulated, she chose to betray me, to betray this family. I continued to leaf through the file until I stopped at a page with the transcript of a recording Veronica had obtained after following Adrian. She turned on the device, and his cold, calculating voice echoed in the room. If you really want to control the game, you have to eliminate the last obstacle. Daniel will have everything, and of course, so will you. Don't see it as a crime, consider it a business strategy. I shuddered, as if an icy current ran down my spine. That voice, soft and cruel, sounded like someone accustomed to manipulating others. Veronica looked at me with absolute firmness. He isn't just an accomplice, Eleanor. He is the true mastermind. I nodded. But inside, a mixture of rage and sadness washed over me. Adrian had turned Isabella into an instrument, a piece willing to eliminate me to achieve his goals. But she was not an innocent victim. She chose that path, chose greed over affection. One afternoon, while I was in the kitchen, silently drinking a cup of now cold coffee, the doorbell rang. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest, as if I sensed something was wrong. When I opened the door, I saw Isabella, with the same radiant smile as always, carrying a basket of still steaming food. "Eleanor," she said, with a sweetness so cloying it made my skin crawl. "I cooked the chicken noodle soup you love the most. Eat it to get your strength back. You've looked a little pale." I looked at her, forcing a smile, but inside I only felt cold. That smile, which once moved me, was now just a mask hiding cruelty. "Thank you, dear," I replied softly, "but I just had lunch. I'm full." Isabella tilted her head, showing a faint flash of disappointment, though she insisted. "Just have a little. I was cooking all morning. Let me serve you." She walked into the kitchen as if it were her own home and served a brimming bowl of soup, leaving it on the table. The aroma filled the air, but in me it only awakened distrust. I didn't know what that bowl contained, but after the orange juice, I couldn't trust anything that came from her hands. "Let me take a bath first," I said, trying to sound calm. "I'm a little tired. I'll try it later." Isabella smiled and nodded. "Okay, Eleanor, you rest. I'll leave the soup here for you." When she turned away, I took the bowl and carried it to the bathroom, emptying it into the toilet. The water carried away the liquid I dared not taste, while my heart beat wildly as if I had just escaped an invisible danger. I stood there watching the swirl, feeling that my trust was also going down the drain along with the soup. The next day, Isabella returned, this time with a box of cheesecakes she claimed to have made herself. "Eleanor, I made cheesecake. I know you like it, right?" she said in the same sweet voice, though I detected a forced undertone. I took the box, thanked her, but as soon as she left, I opened the lid, looked at the shiny golden desserts, and threw them all into the trash can in the backyard. I stood motionless, my hand still clinging to the rim, as if I were throwing away a piece of my own heart. Isabella had been someone I loved, someone I trusted to bring happiness to Daniel. Now, every gesture of hers only caused me fear and pain. Daniel knew nothing of this. He spent all day at work, rarely answered the phone, and when he did, he responded hastily. "Mom, I'm very busy. I'll call you tonight." But he never called at night. I wanted to tell him, to talk about the orange juice, the lab results, the debts, and Isabella's cruel messages, but I knew he wouldn't listen. I once hinted at something about the food she brought me, and he dismissed it immediately. "Mom, you always think the worst. Isabella is just worried about your health. My wife isn't like that." His voice sounded irritated, as if I were the one destroying his marriage. I wanted to scream that it wasn't mistrust, that I had proof, but I held back. All the proof was with Veronica, because I didn't dare keep it at home, for fear Isabella would discover it. One night I decided I had to confront Daniel. I sent him a text, asking him to come to the house. "Son, come over tonight. I need to talk about something important," I wrote, my hand trembling as I pressed send. Daniel arrived, but as soon as he walked in, I could see on his face that he wasn't happy. "Mom, what's so urgent?" he asked, his tone a little annoyed. I took a deep breath, sat across from him, and began to tell him. I told him about Marcus's warning, about the glass of juice, about the results with digitalis. I tried to stay calm, but tears threatened to spill. "Daniel, I don't want to believe it, but everything indicates that Isabella tried to harm me." He looked at me, his eyes full of confusion, and then he scowled and shouted, "Mom, you're always prejudiced against my wife. Do you think Isabella is capable of something like that? I don't want to hear any more of this." His voice boomed, sharp, like a knife straight to my heart. I wanted to explain, to show him the evidence, but I realized I had nothing with me. All the documents, all the messages, were with Veronica, to keep them safe. I could only stand there, watching my son get up, slam the door, and leave. The slam of the door sounded like an explosion, leaving me alone in the empty room. I remained motionless, my face in my hands, tears streaming down. I felt completely alone, as if the entire world had turned its back on me. Daniel, the son I dedicated my life to protecting, was now on the side of the one who wanted to hurt me. I thought of Arthur, of the days when we overcame so many difficulties together, and I wondered what he would do if he were here. He would hug me, tell me not to give up, but he was gone, and only I remained, facing a plot that was not yet over. I stood up, dried my tears, and tried to take a deep breath. I knew I couldn't fall apart. The truth needed time, evidence, and to be brought to light by justice, not by my emotions. The next morning, Veronica picked me up just as dawn was breaking. She wore a black coat and held a folder full of evidence tightly. The lab results with digitalis, the papers of Isabella's debts, the poisoned messages, and the recording with Adrian's cold voice. I looked at the folder and felt that they weren't just papers, but an entire part of my life, the days when I trusted, loved, and now had been betrayed. "Ready, Eleanor?" Veronica asked, her gaze firm but with a hint of concern. I nodded, although my heart was pounding in my chest. "Let's go," I said, my voice dry. The police precinct was on the outskirts of the city, a gray building with long corridors and a strong smell of disinfectant. The inspector, a middle-aged man with a hard face, received us in a small room. He looked at the folder, at first with skepticism. "Are you telling me your daughter-in-law tried to poison you?" he asked in a flat tone, as if hearing something unbelievable. I took a deep breath and recounted everything. Marcus's warning, the glass of juice, the napkin, and the lab results. Veronica added details, her voice firm, presenting each piece of evidence like an experienced lawyer. When Veronica played the recording of Adrian, his cold voice echoed in the room. "If you really want to control the game, you have to eliminate the last obstacle. Daniel will have everything, and of course, so will you." The inspector's face changed immediately. He sat up straight, narrowed his eyes, and I saw his hand grip the pen tightly. "This is very serious evidence," he said in a grave voice. "We will open an official investigation immediately." I nodded, feeling as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but at the same time, a new pain was awakening. This meant they would arrest Isabella, and Daniel, my son, would have to face a cruel truth. Just 2 days later, Veronica called me, her voice rushed. "Eleanor, they caught Isabella." Just as she was leaving a clandestine casino, I stood frozen, clutching the phone in my hand. "They caught her?" I asked in a trembling voice. "Yes, and Adrian too," Veronica replied. He was about to flee, but the police stormed his luxury apartment. They put them both in handcuffs. I said nothing, just nodded, even though I knew she couldn't see me. I felt a strange relief, but it was soon replaced by pain. Isabella, whom I once considered a daughter, was now a criminal. And Daniel? What would become of him when he found out? I went to the precinct as soon as I knew Daniel was there. When I entered, I saw him in a corner, his eyes red and his face gaunt. They were bringing Isabella out, handcuffed, with an expression of horror and bewilderment. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for mercy for an instant, but I simply turned my face away. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't face someone who had tried to harm me. Daniel ran to me, took my hand, his voice broken. "Mom, is this true?" I didn't answer. I just placed Veronica's file in front of him. "Read," I said, my voice cracking. I didn't want to believe it either, but this is the truth. Daniel looked through the papers with trembling hands, so much so that he dropped a few pages. When he got to the messages Isabella had sent to Adrian once she disappears, "Daniel will inherit everything." He collapsed into a chair, covering his face with his hands. "No, it can't be," he murmured, his voice in pieces. I wanted to hug him, to tell him everything would be okay, but I couldn't. The truth was like a dagger, not only piercing his heart, but mine as well. I stood there, watching my son fall apart, feeling that I was breaking inside too. At the same time, I learned that another team of police officers had arrested Adrian in a luxury apartment downtown. He, the respectable businessman who appeared in business magazines, was now in handcuffs, his gaze evasive as they led him away. I didn't see it, but Veronica told me about it, with bitterness in her voice. He still tried to say it was all a misunderstanding, but the evidence is too clear. He's not getting away. The next day, Daniel came to my house. He looked like a shadow, his eyes sunken after a sleepless night, his gray suit wrinkled as if he hadn't even bothered to change. "Mom," he said in a hoarse voice, "I filed for divorce." I looked at him, wanted to say something, but my throat closed up. I just nodded and hugged him. For the first time in many days, I felt the warmth of my son, though he also carried an indescribable pain. "Forgive me, Mom," he whispered, his tears soaking my shoulder. "I didn't believe you." I held him tight as my own tears rolled down. "It doesn't matter, son," I said with a trembling voice. "All I want is for you to be safe." The months following the arrests of Isabella and Adrian, I lived in a strange state, between relief and emptiness. The fear of death was gone, but the pain of betrayal remained, like a wound that never fully closes. Daniel and I spoke less, not because we were angry, but because we were both trying to find a way to face the broken pieces of our family. Every time I looked into his eyes, I saw a deep wound, and I knew he saw the same in mine. The trial arrived like a storm, drawing the attention of the entire city. The courthouse was downtown, an old building with gray stone walls and hard wooden benches. I sat in the front row, my hands gripping the edge of the seat, trying to remain calm. Isabella entered, gaunt in an orange prison uniform, her once shiny hair now tangled, her gaze lowered, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Adrian, a few steps from her, still tried to show arrogance. His expensive suit seemed out of place, and though he feigned confidence, his eyes betrayed his fear. I looked at them, these two people who had turned my life and Daniel's into a nightmare, and I felt a strange emptiness. There was no more anger or hatred, just a bitter sadness. The trial lasted all day, but for me, it was like an endless dream. The prosecutor presented the evidence, the lab results with digitalis, the debt documents, Isabella's cruel messages, and the recording of Adrian's cold voice. With each piece of evidence, I looked at Daniel, sitting a few seats away, his head bowed and his shoulders shaking. When Adrian's recording played, "Don't think of this as a crime, see it as a business strategy," I heard a choked sob from my son. I wanted to run to him, to hug him, but I knew that in that moment, he had to face the truth on his own. Isabella said nothing in her defense, just bowed her head as tears streamed down her face. Adrian, on the other hand, tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that he was only helping Isabella as a mentor. But the evidence was too clear, impossible to deny. When the judge delivered the sentence, several years in prison for Isabella, for attempted murder, and for Adrian, an equivalent sentence for being the mastermind, instigator, and for usury, the entire courtroom fell silent. I watched Isabella being led away in handcuffs and felt an indescribable sadness. Not because I pitied her, but because it hurt to remember that I once believed she was part of our family. That same day, the court approved Daniel's divorce petition. As we left, he took my hand and said in a broken voice, "Mom, I'm sorry. I was wrong not to believe you. I hugged him, tears running down my cheeks. It's not your fault, Daniel, I replied. My voice choked. All I want is for you to be happy. But we both knew that happiness had already been stolen, leaving scars that would never heal. After the trial, I returned home and sat in the living room, looking at the wedding photo of Arthur and me. I thought about the $36 million, that money that was once my pride, but now felt like a curse. I didn't want to keep it, didn't want it to remind me of everything that had happened. One night, alone in the living room, I remembered the early days of the bakery business with Arthur. The smell of freshly ground wheat, his smile when he heard compliments from customers. Then I knew what I had to do. I decided to use all that money to create a foundation in his name, the Miller Fund, to support artisan bakers and small local bakeries, people like us in those early years, full of passion, but without opportunities. On the day of the fund's inauguration, a food festival was organized in the city's central plaza. I stood among the crowd, smelling the aroma of freshly baked bread that filled the air, listening to the laughter and lively voices. The stalls were full of color, and young bakers proudly presented their creations. A young girl with bright eyes went on stage, took the microphone, and said, "I used to think my dream of opening a bakery was just an illusion. But thanks to the Miller Fund, I got a chance. Thank you, Mrs. Miller. Thank you for giving us a future." The crowd applauded, and I, sitting in a corner, couldn't hold back my tears. They weren't of sadness, but because I felt that Arthur was smiling somewhere, proud of what we had achieved. I walked among the stalls, stopping in front of a small pastry table where a young boy was carefully decorating some cookies. "Try one, ma'am," he said, offering me a heart-shaped cookie. I took a bite, the sweet taste spreading in my mouth, and I smiled. "It's delicious," I said, my voice trembling. He smiled broadly. "Thank you, ma'am. I made this cookie to give to my mom, but you reminded me of her." Those words were like a balm that healed a little piece of my broken heart. I sat on a wooden bench, looked up at the clear blue sky. I thought of Arthur, of Daniel, and of the days when we overcame so many difficulties together. I thought of Isabella, of the pain she left, but I no longer felt resentment. I chose to forgive, not for her, but for myself, so I could move on. The true legacy of the Miller family is not the $36 million, but the values we leave behind: trust, strength, and love for the community. Looking back at everything that happened, I understood that the greatest lesson was not in the money, the betrayal, or the pain I endured, but in the strength of faith and perseverance. Money can blind. Ambition can turn the closest people into enemies. But the truth will always come to light. I want to tell you something. Never let betrayal extinguish the goodness in your heart. Be clear-sighted to recognize who truly deserves your affection. Be strong enough to defend justice for yourselves, and use what you have to sow good things in life. Because in the end, the values we leave for the community and for future generations are the true legacy, and the pain, sooner or later, will fade. The story you have just heard has had names and places changed to protect the identities of the people involved. We don't tell this to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to keep the peace? Or would you have the courage to face it all, to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that lights the way for another. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. Right now, on the final screen, I will leave you two of the channel's most beloved stories. I am sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.